Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for choosing this session. I know there are a lot of good sessions going on at any given time, and as they say, we know you have a choice when you fly. Thank you for flying with us, especially staying for the last speaker. I really appreciate that. When we first organized this, we had the idea that we would have a longer Q&A session at the end, but I think that the way it's unfolded, probably we won't have time for that. So I'll take you to the end. So I'm going to talk today about a few things that represent important status elements for V2X in the United States. From my perspective, I'm really speaking mostly my own views here, but I think this is consistent with what our company thinks. First, I'm going to talk about the FCC and the rulemaking that came out late last year. That was the most important thing probably that happened since we were together in Dubai. I will also bring you up to date on what's happening with standardization of V2X in the United States. Talk a little bit about where we stand with deployment. Justin laid the groundwork for that. I contacted Justin a couple weeks ago and I said, please tell me you're going to show a map. And he did. Thank you for that. They put together the best maps and have the best source of data on the status of deployment. So I think that was very illustrative of where we're going, but I'll have a few comments about that. And at the end, I'll say a couple of words about some activity that we're doing here in ITS America related to both direct V2X and network V2X and trying to bring those communities closer together to help each other. So, FCC, as some of you know, we've been waiting a long time for the FCC to finish their rulemaking business. We were in kind of what I call the dark ages there for a while, with everything really on hold until this was done. And finally, in November, they produced the final rules. So it's taking us from a long era of regulatory uncertainty into now a pretty certain regulatory environment. That's really important for moving ahead with deployment because it's removing an important source of risk. This table lists several of the key components of the rulemaking. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but I'll bring your attention to the right column where I noted whether the thing that they said in November met what we expected them to say, met our expectations. And you see in the large majority of cases, it did. We needed this rulemaking to finalize things, but we pretty much knew what it was going to say anyway. There were a couple of areas where we were a little bit surprised, and I'll talk about those in the next couple of slides, but in a good way, with giving us additional flexibility perhaps. So power, channelization protocol, is it limited to safety applications was one important question. The answer is no. We can do other things like tolling. And that helps with deployment as well. Some of you may remember that when they took away the 45 megahertz, they called that Uni 4, and in the first rulemaking in 2020, they had rules both for our 30 megahertz and for the Uni 4 45 megahertz, and they proposed to expand those rules last year, but they did not. We think those rules will be updated, will be coming in a separate rulemaking. So we're not out of the woods there yet. They still may allow those Uni 4 devices inside our car, but for now, they're not allowed. And another important element is that all of those manufacturers who applied for waivers were granted waivers and then submitted their equipment for certification under the waiver. All of that equipment is automatically compliant with the new rules, so no need to recertify. That'll also help speed things up. So what about these two issues that I said were a little bit surprising? First is, all of these documents from the FCC are written with the term CV2X, and it was always a question of what does that actually mean? And in 2019, they said, we propose to define that as Release 14 LTV2X. Please comment. There weren't too many comments. There were some comments saying, let's give us some extra flexibility. And in the final rules, we were a little bit surprised to see that that's what they did. They gave us extra flexibility. So these rules apply whether you're using 4G LTE V2X or 5G new radio or 7G, whatever comes later, anything from 3GPP qualifies as C-V2X. But what that means is that the onus is on us in the community to reach a consensus about how we're actually going to deploy it so we can interoperate. And they laid down a marker, and you can see the quotation here. We expect that the industry will ensure that all equipment is interoperable and that future equipment will be forwards and backwards compatible. That's an expectation. I hope we can live up to that. The forward and backward compatible part may be a challenge, but in any case, we have some work to do to make sure that we have a consensus. I'll talk about that more on the next slide. There is a way in which this is an advantage. It gives us some flexibility. If for some reason we wanted to do something other than LTV2X, maybe in the 10 megahertz channel, we don't have to go back to them for another rulemaking in order to proceed. We have the right to do that. The potential disadvantage is that this looks like a little bit more uncertainty, that looks like risk, and that looks like a barrier to some people. So we want to do everything we can to remove the perception that risk and uncertainty remains. The second topic was with regard to channelizing the 30 megahertz. So what they said was you should consider this 30 megahertz to be divided into 10 megahertz channels, and those can be combined at your will. So you can combine 2 of them into 20 megahertz, all 3 of them into 30 megahertz. They can be overlapping. We're giving you complete flexibility, and again, we expect you as an industry to decide what your consensus is. We have a consensus in the industry, and it's shown on the right side of this slide, which is a 10 plus 20. 10 megahertz and 20 megahertz adjacent, no overlapping channels. That's what we intend to deploy. That's what we in SAE have written our standards to do. So recognizing that these 2 bits of extra flexibility came into the rules in a slightly unexpected way, SAE is now undertaking to produce a document. It will be called J3345, and what it will say is, here is the consensus of SAE about how to use these rules and where that flexibility comes down. So it's a profile in effect. And we're going to say the protocol is LTV2X, which is 14, and our channelization is 10 plus 20, and that's what our standards reflect. So that document should be coming within the year. So that's the FCC. Let me move on to the topic of standardization. The key point here that I want you to come away with, if you remember only one thing, is that all of the standards that we need for initial deployment are already done. They're stable, they're mature, nothing more is needed. And that's actually been true for some time. So standards have not been holding us back. Now we are doing additional work in standards, and Razvan talked about some of these things, and Niels talked about some of these things for more advanced A2 types of services. That activity is going on. But don't confuse that to mean that the standards are somehow in flux. Everything that's needed is there. A little bit more in the weeds for those of you who live and breathe standard stacks. There's the SAE part of it at the top, and then there's the IEEE 1609 part in the middle. We are doing some work there to continue to refine the security standards and the protocols by which you get your certificates in 1609.2 and 1609.2.1, and the 1609.3 standard that's very stable defines 2 things, and we're going to actually split that document into 2. So it defines the wave short message protocol, and it defines the wave service advertisement. Both of those have lived inside of 1609.3 for more than 15 years, but we've made a decision for efficiency reasons to bring it up to date. We're going to continue WSMP in 1609.3, and we're going to create a new document, 1609.30, where the WSA specification goes. So that's a little bit of detail for some of you who are interested in that. Here's a list of just some of the standards that are in work at SAE right now. There's a long list of them. Most of them, more than half of them, are in the final ballot or approval stage. There are some that are newer works in progress. I just will mention 3 of them that I've highlighted in bold. The 3315 standard is for aftermarket V2X devices, so that can help bridge the gap between now and when we get mass production vehicles from automakers. The 4501 implementation guide is important way to achieve common experiences for automakers, no matter where you encounter an RSU, whether it's in Atlanta or Utah or California. If they follow this implementation guide, then your car will experience that interaction in the same way. And then at the bottom, the 3224/1, this is profiling how to do sensor-based intersections. So intersections are increasingly being equipped with sensors that can detect the presence of pedestrians, bicyclists, and also other unequipped cars, and then can convey that in sensor data sharing messages, like the collective perception message from Europe. And we have that sensor data sharing message already standardized, but this 3224/1 will talk about how those intersection devices can use that message to properly convey about other things that are in the intersection. So that should help with the safety and also help with the lack of penetration of vehicles. So let me turn quickly to the deployment situation. I guess what I want to say is standards are ready for deployment. I've been saying that for a few years now. I said that earlier in this talk. Now, because of the FCC action, we can say the regulations are also ready for deployment. We're really not waiting for anything. We're just waiting for deployment. We have seen deployment happening on the RSU side, the infrastructure side, and for that we're very grateful. We saw it in Justin's map, but the numbers need to increase. Those RSU numbers are in the thousands. The deployment plans from USDOT and ITS America call for deployments on the order of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of equipped intersections, and that's going to need some help. We need to get additional funding to accelerate that so that we can meet these goals, and that will help bring in the automakers. We're following this infrastructure first deployment strategy these days. So the infrastructure will lead and the vehicles will follow. That's the theory. Let's hope that that is the way it bears out. What about the OEMs? Well, this is what I've been saying is that this is the time for automakers who have been kind of on the sidelines waiting and seeing, wait and see mode, to kind of end the wait and see mode. It's now time to come back, reassess the situation. We had a lot of momentum 10 years ago, and we lost that for a variety of reasons. But all of the reasons that we wanted to do V2X then are still there. And it's still an imperative for us to bring this into a successful market to save lives. Tens of thousands of lives are at stake. I copied here a headline that I saw in February from Automotive News. It says, the states are investing in this life-saving technology, meaning V2X. Why aren't the automakers? So people are watching. People are watching what we're doing. And it's time for us to reassess and hopefully move forward. Lastly, I did want to touch this ITS America activity. In ITS America, we have a V2X and Connected Transportation Committee that does a lot of good work at the committee level, but we also have two important working groups doing more detailed work underneath that. One of them is the future of 5.9, and that's where all the 5.9 related work is going on, and I'm a part of that, and it's doing good work. The second one, though, is kind of everything else. We call it Beyond 5.9 gigahertz Working Group, and I'm privileged to co-lead that with Superman Brock Hahn from Hasselard, who does so much for all of us at ITS America. This group, if I could sum up its mission, it's to bring together the direct V2X and the network V2X communities so we get to know each other and can work together. And because we kind of have been evolving separately, and there's no reason that we should. So last year, this group produced a Beyond 5.9 deployment plan that talks a lot about network V2X and what's happening there, but also talks about some alternative ways of doing direct V2X that don't use 5.9. This year, our group is very busy producing deliverables. The first one, which is nearly out, is a mapping document that takes V2X, direct V2X use cases that we're all familiar with, and talks about how those are being implemented in some form or another on the network V2X side. Maybe not identical, but with similar words and similar goals. We're also working on a very interesting document, and this goes to what the cohesion that Razvan was speaking to in the last talk. We need to have as much commonality or cohesion between the network and direct V2X sides as we can to bring them together and make the jobs of automakers easier, quite frankly. So whether we're sourcing services from multiple service providers, or whether we have similar services that are being offered to us over the network and over direct, we need as much interoperability among them as we can get. So that's a strong effort that we're undertaking as well. So let me just sum up by saying the FCC rulemaking was important. It's taken us out of that uncertainty into a regulatory certainty stage. The V2X standards are done for day one. We're working on advanced standards for day two. Deployment of RSUs is happening, but it needs some help to accelerate. Deployment of OBUs remains the biggest challenge. The focus right now is mostly on specialty vehicles, transit, emergency, school buses. But we need to build on that and work toward the era of mass production. Network V2X is becoming more and more important, and we need to work together as a community to make, as I say here, seek ways to make it a catalyst for direct V2X rather than a competitor. And then just finally, the success that we're all seeking here relies on us continuing to collaborate among all the sets of stakeholders like we do when we come together for this week. That's been the mantra for this community for all of the years I've worked in it. We have more work to do. Let's keep working on it together. Thank you very much.